The Marino Show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Marino Show. I'm your host, David Marino. I am so excited to have our guest today. Joel Rice played Radish in the cult horror film Final Exam. He is now working behind the scenes as president of Muse Entertainment USA. Joel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I was a little surprised to get the call.
You know, I think that's funny because we are seeing such a resurgence in horror, you know, especially over the last several years with a number of different films coming back out, like the Halloween trilogy that was recently done, Scream. You know, for people like me who grew up in the 80s, who loved these horror films, these slasher flicks, I feel like a lot of that's coming back to light, or people are going back and finding these films. For you, though, being a part of this movie, how did you even get the audition? How did it all come about?
It's kind of a fun story. I was a junior in college at Wesleyan University, visiting my brother for the summer in LA with my best friend. And I was studying acting and psychology at Wesleyan. And I read about an audition in just like a trade magazine. So it was a non-union movie. And it was my very first professional audition. I did the audition, you know, there were hundreds and hundreds of people. And then my friend and I decided, we were driving back to college, so I figured I wouldn't hear anything of it. And we jumped in the car and drove cross country back to college in Connecticut. And then when we got to Colorado, we were visiting a friend, my brother who lived here called me to say that I had a call back and I needed to be back in LA. So I left, we were actually Utah. I left my friend in Utah in Salt Lake City and I flew back to LA. It was down to 5 of us for the lead role. So that was like my first experience, which was pretty exciting. So I auditioned for the role and then I went back I made sure that even if they were doing the movie, that it wouldn't be until September. So I drove back because we were driving together cross country and met him back in Salt Lake City and then headed back to Connecticut. When I got to Kansas, it was down to 2 of us and I had to fly back again. So my friend agreed that he'd go the rest of the way himself and that I would stay in LA till I found out what happened. And then I got cast as the lead. It was shocking. I had no frame of reference, not to self-promote, but I was in my second play that I was ever in high school. I was in 10th grade. I was chosen as the best performer in all of New England. So I have that kind of weird experience of getting very successful early and then having to maintain it. Because my very first film that I made as a producer also did extremely well. And then, you know, and had great people in it, had Treat Williams and Kelly McGillis and Hal Holbrook. So I've had a lot of great first experiences.
So the character of Radish to me really stands out in this film because he is so self-aware. And I find that a lot of the films back at that time, like the late 70s, early 80s, there weren't many characters that were self-aware, except for, of course, you know, the final girl, which eventually became aware. But there wasn't really a character throughout the film that was sort of giving these warnings and, you know, like foreshadowing what was to come. So I feel like Radish was such a different type of character to see in a horror film at that time. How did you feel about that character and just being able to play Radish?
So I personally wasn't that knowledgeable about horror films. So you're really singling that out right now and making me think about that. I know that my character was the voice of what was going on, and I was obsessed with true crime. And so I was very much the entry point to comment on what was happening, which is, you know, it's a very current day kind of thing, you know, to have a tongue in cheek or have a wink with the lead character. So in this case, it was just my character was obsessed with crime. And so I was hyper aware, even if it was unfounded. In this case, it was founded.
Your character, I don't know if you're familiar or if you follow any horror movies now, but Scream, the original Scream, in the late 90s when it came out, there was a character, Randy Meeks. And he was another one of those characters that was very self-aware, comedic. And I feel like some of the inspiration for his character was actually taken from Radish, because a lot of the filmmakers that were into the 90s, 2000s were drawing from the films that, you know, that happened in the 80s that maybe weren't as big, but they drew inspiration from that. Do you ever hear that, or have you thought about that? Or are you familiar with Randy Meeks?
No, I'm not at all. So that's very cool. I'll check that out.
So talk to me about making the film. Did you all film it? I saw an earlier interview that you did. You filmed it during the summer, and where did you film it? And, you know, how did that all go?
Yeah, it's funny because you're asking me about something a very long time ago, but I remember everything about it. So I'm happy to share. And it was fun to think about this morning when I was anticipating the interview. So it shot in Shelby, North Carolina. And, you know, I'd never done a movie or anything like that. All of us were like a group of young people getting this opportunity. It shot in like 4 weeks. And I do remember some funny situations, like the day that I was killed, the day we were shooting my being killed, we didn't have catering or anything, which is a very common thing on a movie to have the meals catered. So we went to a restaurant each day for lunch, and I had to keep my makeup on for continuity. So I had the blood all over my face while I was at the salad bar. And I remember a kid coming up to me and freaking out. So that was kind of funny. And I also remember I was very serious about being an actor. And I remember a group of the cast planning to go into whatever it was, Charlotte or something like that, for the weekend. And I was like, no, I'm not going to go. I have my big monologue on a big phone call on Monday. I'm going to stay home. And then they all got in trouble, not like got arrested or anything, but they got in trouble in some ways. So I was really glad that I didn't go. And the female lead and I were very close, and we took it, you know, everyone took it seriously, but we didn't, we were very conscientious. We had the most to do, obviously. So we were the most focused on preparation. So yeah, it was a very rich experience. I remember them rushing me through the phone call because it was late. You know, now I'm a producer, so in retrospect, I understand all the things that they were feeling, you know. But you know, in retrospect, also saying the lines faster doesn't get the night done faster. You know, you just have to do it well and have less takes. But I do remember them rushing me. But I do of everything in the film, I do really like that phone call probably the most because it was the most dramatic, you know, and it was fun.
And I loved the relationship in the film that you had with Courtney, Cecile Baghdadi, is her real name in real life. How was it working with her, and what was your relationship like off screen?
Well, I had a mad crush on her. I was in love with her. And so it was very easy for me to play that part. And we continued to be friends afterwards. Her dad was a producer. We cast a film together, and it was a great relationship. She was a very, you know, even though she was younger than me, she was more entertainment industry savvy. She grew up in Beverly Hills. She went to Beverly Hills High. I'm from a small town outside of Boston. You know, it was all new to me. So she kind of guided me through the process.
When the film came out, did y'all have a big premiere? What happened with that?
Well, so I didn't have much money, and we did have we went to we didn't have a premiere, but we went to the theater where it was playing, and all went together and watched it. So that was fun to see it with an audience. But the thing that I missed out on was it also premiered in this fantastic theater in Boston, and I can't really understand how my parents didn't step up to pay for me to fly home. I didn't have money, and because the entire city, the entire town that I grew up in was at the screening, I would have been happy to be there. It was not Saks Fifth Avenue, but like the Saks Theater in Boston. It was a big deal, and I missed out on that, so that was a bit of a bummer.
So when the film came out, did you get recognized at all, or what was the process like after that?
I do remember doing the press for it, and it was a time where there was some backlash for the 80s horror films because there were some copycat murders and some, you know, it continued to be a thing with suicide. You know, you have to be careful about suicide depiction on screen because you don't want to romanticize it. Anyway, so I remember I had to defend the fact that it was that it was it was a horror film and that was all this violence, and do I worry about copycat murders? And I found that very odd for me because it's not like I wrote the film and then they would like, your character, they'd like act like I was the one that was responsible for it, and so it was interesting to navigate. But the other thing that was interesting, and I'm sure you guys think about this, and I'm curious what you thought about it, because in general, a horror film, as a producer, I certainly follow more this line of thinking that the murderer, the criminal, needs motivation. And the writer director felt like he would defy the sort of convention by being more realistic, which is obviously serial killers often don't have a real motivation. They're just killing people. Their motivation is to kill, but not who they're killing. Remember, my character said, people kill people for no reason at all. Like I was trying to be the voice of the writer director. I felt like that's who I was the writer director. It was probably based on his own fascination with crime and thinking that this would be a good way to do it. So, I don't know what you thought about that it was a movie without a motivation.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to talk about that actually and ask you about it. What I find interesting is that maybe back at that time, that was sort of the criticism, but I find it to be kind of flipped today. I feel when there's too much motivation, especially in horror movies, that it turns fans off. I think that happened with, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. The Halloween remake in the 2000s Rob Zombie's film. I liked it. A lot of the fans, though, and the chatter was about that Rob Zombie gave too much background to Michael growing up and then becoming a serial killer, whereas the original Halloween in 1978, there was no motivation. He just killed his sister one day and they never really explained. They didn't explain it. He was just evil. I find it to be more scary when somebody doesn't have a motivation. And I'm a fan of true crime, ID channel, all of that. And I find it to be much more horrifying when somebody just does it because they have to, because it's something in them that feeds them, if that makes sense. So I actually feel very opposite about it. I think it's scarier. The other thing about the killer is that in this film, he didn't actually have a mask, which is also different for films at that time. What did you think about that? Did you get any backlash on that too? Did people talk to you about that in the press?
No, not at all. Because I don't know that they always had a mask, but and I think if I remember correctly, he was in sort of an army and military. And so one would assume that it was, a post-traumatic stress that sent him off, after having to kill people in war and stuff, that unleashed something in him. But, I didn't think about him not having a mask, but I did. They played a prank on me, which I'm just remembering as you're talking to me, which will be fun. And it was the guy who played the killer who had a very fun sense of humor. I was supposed to open the door to try to get away from him, to get into the college dorm. And they always made fun of the way I ran also. I was wearing corduroys and the corduroys made a sound, which I think they then turned up. And I was, I wasn't athletic at all, but I did run a million times that night and very fast. But they locked the door so that I couldn't get in. So like here I am frantically trying to get away from the killer and they locked the door so I couldn't get in.
That's funny. Speaking of the killer, you said you had a good relationship with him. You had a good sense of humor. What was it like on set with him and the other cast members?
Well, I think it was odd for him because he was the killer. He wanted to be, I remember him as a guy that really wanted to be liked and be in with the group. But there was a sort of like, not like a actor methody thing, but, there's the killer and then there's the rest of us. We all got very close and he wasn't a part of that.
The kill scene. I love your kill probably the most out of the film because you get pulled in by the door. Can you remember shooting that and how that all went that day?
I had to not anticipate this fist coming through the door, right? That's what happened. A fist came through and grabbed my neck. So I feel like they did some sort of prank around that as well. I can't remember exactly what it was, sorry. But it was hard because you were really having to not anticipate it, not blink, not do all that kind of thing. I mean, I love the photograph of me that was taken with me, how she finds me afterwards.
After Final Exam came out, what was your trajectory after that? Because now today, obviously you are, behind the scenes in a big way, but what was your path after? Did you continue on with acting, or did you always have, kind of aspirations to do more producing and that type of thing?
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't have aspirations to be a producer. I didn't know anything about how movies were made or anything. I really was just a small town kid who was getting an opportunity. I always wanted to be an actor, and they had put us in a 3-picture deal. The money was terrible, even for that time. Like it was just non-union scale, whatever. It was so little, so it wasn't like I could have lived off of it for any length of time. I was a junior in college when I did that, the summer of my junior year. So my mom wanted me to get my college degree still. So I moved to LA, missed out on my senior year of college, which was, which it made no sense to go back to college if I wanted to be an actor. And now I'm starting an acting career. But I did miss being with my friends and stuff. I was allowed to graduate with them, and I got credit for doing the film and for writing about the horror genre. And then I took some classes in LA that year so that I was able to graduate with my friends. They never made another movie because I don't know that it did well enough to spark a sequel. But I was kind of tied up with that for a few months, and then I was free to do other stuff. My acting career, I did a lot of theater. I did Diary of Anne Frank, first with Meg Tilly and then with another actress in a LA theater, and Anthony Hopkins was, which is I'm sure people love Anthony Hopkins that are horror fans. He was doing a one-man show the weekend before and was so incredible. And he was like, I hope I get an audience. And it was a 99-seat theater. And I'm like, Sir Anthony, there are 300 people in LA that would pay for you to do nothing. So you will have an audience. But he was very supportive. That was cool. I never really had a career that really took off as an actor. I did a thing called Terror in the Aisles. I don't know if you know what that is.
Oh, I remember that. Didn't it come out in the mid 80s? It was a horror film. Was it kind of looking back on films?
I don't know if they realized they chose someone who was in one of those films, but we were really mirroring Seymour and Audrey from Little Shop of Horrors. We were the two people commenting on the film in the audience. It was a big nothing, but I just mentioned it because it was in the horror genre. But I didn't really have that much success. And I had a degree in psychology as well. And so I actually became a social worker after I decided not to continue to pursue acting. I was at a point in my life, I was getting married, and I wanted to earn money. In my family, my parents were very supportive of my pursuing my acting. And I lived with my brother, so I didn't have rent. And I worked as a waiter, which was always a great way to make money, where you could audition during the week and then be a waiter at night and make your entire week's salary. I remember I had a girlfriend that was when I was a waiter. So it was a very nice life, that kind of thing. I did plays. And then when I was with my wife, who was my girlfriend for a while, she worked, she kind of supported me, which I really appreciated. I would sleep at her place and sleep in. She'd be out to work, and then I'd go for a rehearsal at noon. I enjoyed that phase of my life very much. And then I became a social worker, and I did that for several years. And I kind of missed, I always wanted to, you get the bug of being able to reach so many people, like a feature film back then, in a weekend could be seen by millions of people. And then on television back then, especially when there were only 3 or 4 channels, one night you could be seen by 10 or 15 million people, or more. So I wanted to get back into the entertainment industry. And that's when I became aware that as a social worker, I wanted to do the kind of things that were about stuff that would, that I could reach the most people if I was a producer. So I did true story. I learned how that people started out, and I got a true story that I thought I had an idea for a film. It was my first idea. It ended up being my 10th film that I made, called About Sarah, about person who with mental retardation that was had a child. And so it was the story of the role reversal when that person became an adult taking care of their mother, which was not my own personal experience. Wasn't that my mom had a developmental disability, but she was ill. So I really was basing it on my own story. But then I found a true story about a woman. I came up with the idea, and then I found a true story, got the LA Times to write about the true story, and then the industry was trying to get the rights to it, but I already had it. So that was like my first idea. That was written about in a magazine, and there was another idea in that magazine that was also about a marriage between a person with a developmental disability and a woman who was, now we call it neurodivergent, and who was neurotypical. And that ended up being my first movie that I made as a producer, and it was with Treat Williams and Kelly McGillis and Hal Holbrook. I'm trying to think if I've done any horror films as a producer. I definitely did things like, I think there was this one called, I'm so sorry. I've done a lot of films as a producer, and they changed it. The Secret She Carried. And it was about a woman who had been raped by a rapist and then got pregnant. And then she had to tell her husband that it was the result of a rape. And then the rapist was in love with her and wanted to get together with her. So that was a kind of horror-y kind of thing. I did a thriller called Deadly Deceit. But, my passion was really about doing things that had something to say. So behind me, my two proudest things right now is Single All the Way, which was Netflix's first gay Christmas movie, and Best Foot Forward, which is a series on Apple right now about a kid with a prosthetic leg, played by a kid with a prosthetic leg.
That's awesome that you were able to take, your career in social work and translate it into the film industry.
Yeah.
So you're now president of Muse Entertainment USA, and they are a large independent Canadian production house responsible for series, pictures. Can you talk about what you do with Muse and how you ended up being part of that entertainment group?
Yeah, I first was in a deal at CBS and then at NBC, and then I went out on my own, and my company was called Wild Rice Productions. And to get a certain tax credit in Canada, you had to team with a Canadian company. So I teamed with Muse on my own films. And then I was offered a deal with a company, now it's called E1, to like an overall deal. And then the president of Muse USA, who is still the president, said, well, we'd like you to forget about that. We'd like to bring you in, and we'd like you to help us penetrate the US market. At the time, we did something called production services, or they did, and a lot of big films. But they were the company that made it in Canada. They didn't create it. So, they did it, that Leo DiCaprio film where he's being chased. He was like a chameleon. He played all different, it feels like the title.
Can?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of great films. We did the production was done in Montreal with our company providing the production services. What I did was create content. And so that's what changed our company into not only production services, but content creators as well. And I've done a lot of films. I've done over 100 films that were on television. And so back in the 90s and the early 2000s, they were issue-driven stuff. Then I did a lot of films at the time it was called ABC Family. It's not called Freeform, which was a lot of young rom-coms. Then I did a lot of films for Hallmark Channel, which was, Christmas and more rom-coms. I continue to do that for Muse, and I do a lot of films for Netflix now as well.
Would you ever step back in front of the camera to do anything?
Well, I actually became a producer for two reasons. One was to do what I said, which was to have issue-driven things and to be in control, which I enjoy. Secondly, I was meaning to create acting opportunities for myself, because I at the time really never saw myself not acting, but when it really came time to producing your own movies, it felt funny to put yourself in it. I was in a couple of my movies, usually only because it was sort of needed. Like there was a doctor in one of my, I did a movie called Half a Dozen Babies. It was one of my first movies, and it was about the first surviving sextuplets, and we couldn't find anyone in where we were shooting that could do the role, and I was a SAG member, so I did it. But it was always weird for me in that everyone knew me in a different capacity, so it was like they made such a big deal out of that I was acting. What I did do was the Hitchcock thing, and probably the first 70 films I did, I put myself in as an extra, and that was fun for my family and my friends. At some point I wasn't always even there, the films that I was making, and I just couldn't find a way to do that. But as a little nest egg, if you were to watch the films I produced, you'd find me in every film in the original ones. I was even in Single All the Way and in Best Foot Forward. I did do a film for Nickelodeon. I did their first film, and it was called Shredder Man, which sounds like it could be a horror film, but it wasn't. He was a superhero, and I was in that as well. I was a teacher that had a speaking part, and I was the voice of this comic book character. So that was fun. I'd be totally open to someone else casting me in a horror film as a little nest egg thing. So if anyone is making horror films and would like to try to put me in one, I'd be really happy to have a little cameo. It would be fun.
Oh, I love that. You heard it here. When you said earlier you were surprised I reached out to you, I think it's surprising that you are, that you're not like in the, I don't know if you're familiar, there's a lot of horror cons where a lot of actors from, the films from the 80s, they go and they sign autographs. I really feel like that would be something like for Final Exam, do you get the cast together, even you on your own or Cecile, that would be something that, because I think it's probably harder for you to realize because you were in it, that people actually do still they care about those films. And there is a fan base out there that like, I have to show you this because I even found the soundtrack to Final Exam on vinyl. That's how much of a fan I am of that film. I just, I think what you find in the horror world is that people are just very dedicated to those films. So do you keep in touch at all with any of the actors from the film today, or have you all kind of lost touch over the years because it was so long ago?
And I've lost touch for sure. I don't know if the two guys that were sort of the goofy jocks, they seem like they got maybe friendly during that time. They might have done it. I think as a producer, every once in a while, like the guy who was Wildman was still acting. And so all of a sudden he'd come in, people get in touch with me sometimes because they think I can provide an opportunity for them, but not that group really. I haven't crossed paths with them for decades. Well, since the 25th anniversary, and which was fun. Oh, I'm wrong though. I'm just remembering. I feel like I saw Cecile another time after that because she's in LA and stuff. But I definitely enjoyed seeing her at the 25th anniversary thing.
Is there anything coming out that you're working on now that you think will be something that people would want to be on the lookout for, whether it's on Netflix or any other streaming service?
I mean, we haven't sold it yet, but we're developing a project called The Good Book, which is in the horror genre. And we're commissioning someone who's writing the screenplay. It's an original idea where it's about a minister who is really the devil. And so it becomes a fight within his soul for his impulses versus the devil's impulses. And it would be a series. And so it's called The Good Book, but it isn't even sold yet. So it's not like about to happen. And then there's an actor named Alex Newell. I don't know if you know who he is from Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. And I built a show around him that's called G is for blank ? And it's about a character who's gender nonconforming, and he left his small town in the South when he was 18. He had an abusive dad, and then his mom dies, and he comes back having inherited half of the company, the shrimp company that they had. And so now he has to work with his dad, who was the one who treated him badly, and also re-enter a town that was not open to who he was who they were when they were first there. That's a comedy that we hope to sell in the streaming world coming up. So those are the two things. But Best Foot Forward is my very proud series that's on the air right now. It's a half-hour comedy about a kid with a prosthetic leg who was always homeschooled, and he enters public school, and his sort of like idea of what it's going to be like and how he will handle it in a very comedic way. Like he memorizes everyone's name in the yearbook and knows the names by heart. And he, everything's a first for him, being on the soccer team. It's played by a kid who has a prosthetic leg. We did a global search for him, and he's phenomenal. And we're hoping to hear about a second season in the next few weeks, but it's on Apple right now. Single All the Way will be running on Netflix this holiday season again. It was quite successful last year. It's gotten a lot of attention lately because the movie Bros did not do well in the theatrical market. And so there were comments about what should be a theatrical movie, especially after COVID, like rom-coms in general don't do well. But there are a few articles that, because it was touted as the first studio gay rom-com. I think what he really meant to say was the first theatrical gay rom-com, which it was, but ours was Netflix, which is clearly a studio, and Fire Island was on Hulu. So it was those were streaming movies though. So there was a lot of articles kept bringing it back up on how ours maybe would have done well theatrically because it was more universal. It was really a family comedy with a gay rom-com at the center of it.
Joel, you actually produce murder mysteries for Hallmark, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so they have a channel called Hallmark Movies and Mysteries. And I've probably done about, whether it was me as the main person or me being involved, I've probably done about 50 of them because they're franchises of movies. So I did something called the Martha's Vineyard Mysteries with Jesse Metcalfe as the star of it. And it was murders that happened on Martha's Vineyard. And so they're mysteries, so they're not quite fully satisfying maybe to a horror fan in terms of there's only usually one or two people that get killed, but they are mysteries in terms of trying to figure out who the killer is. And that's really fun. And so I did something called Martha's Vineyard Mysteries. I did 5 of those. I did a franchise of movies called Gourmet Detective, where a leading chef was teamed up with a policewoman to solve crimes people that had died in the food world. I did something called Fixer Upper Mysteries with Jewel, the singer, was the star of it. And she would come across dead bodies in her work in fixing up Victorian homes. I did the Emma Fielding Mysteries with Courtney Thorne-Smith as the star of it, and James Tupper. And she was an archaeologist. And so it was usually a cold case, like she'd dig up something in her work in archaeology. And now I'm doing them again recently. And so they're evolving. I'm doing a new one called Exonerated, which is about 5 law students and law clerks who, trying to get people out of prison who were falsely accused, have to figure out who the real murderer was. So that's like the new, that kind of thing is the evolution of the Hallmark Movies and Mysteries for Hallmark, because they'd like to get the younger audience. Like, as in horror, it does have a very young audience, but mysteries by nature seem to have an older audience because it's like Murder, She Wrote, so we're trying to find that balance, not by having necessarily more deaths, but having young people at the center of it. So I think that would be a really fun one to be on the lookout for. It's called Exonerated. And then I have another one called Murder in G Major, which is a woman who teams with a ghost who haunts the house that she's in and begs her to help solve the murder that he was falsely accused of, because he can't go to heaven until it's resolved. And they work together to solve the murder. So that's another fun one that I'm doing.
What else is on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I love being with Muse Entertainment because they're based in Canada. And so I sort of run my own company, but it's under the umbrella of Muse Entertainment. And then they're such a resource and such a support for me, and such a situation that really allows me and my team in the US to really pursue really exciting projects. And so the future, hopefully, it's been a very good moment for me that they continue to grow. I have a film coming out on Netflix called Tourist Guide to Love, which will come out in April. And I have many other Netflix films in development. We're really trying to crack the adult series, US adult series market and the bigger budget film streaming films.